For me, when I meet someone at a networking event, firstly, I'm interested before I try to be interesting. When you tell a story for 5 seconds, it's going to feel like 5 minutes for you. When you're telling a story, they're not responding. So what I would highly recommend is making sure that the story isn't longer than it needs to be, but you touch on all the points, and the most important part of that is the emotional element of the journey. Now in cold calling, just as an example, using logical fact, they got 8 seconds before a C-level executive would hang up. We averaged over 2.5 minutes for a person hanging on the phone with a story, and I'm talking C-level executives that work for multinational corporations. John was very similar to your situation, said what you did, and then you move in. You don't say, let me tell you a story, you just go straight into it.
If you're taking a call with somebody trying to make a sale, and I'm thinking, hey, here's a story that might connect with these people or whatever, just time duration. How long do you want to spend talking or sharing your story versus trying to get them to start talking about themselves?
Okay, so firstly, great question. One of the things that just everybody should know is when you tell a story for 5 seconds, it's going to feel like 5 minutes for you. Especially because when you're telling a story, they're not responding. And because it's not a two-way dialogue, a lot of times it feels like we're taking up too much airtime. And in the world of sales, we learn to get them to do most of the talking. In storytelling, none of those rules apply. Now in cold calling, just as an example, using logical fact, they got 8 seconds before a C-level executive would hang up. We averaged over 2.5 minutes for a person hanging on the phone with a story, and I'm talking C-level executives that work for multinational corporations. So what I would suggest is don't go beyond 2.5 minutes, but try to stick over 60 seconds. Because what usually happens if you tell a story for like 15 to 30 seconds is all you're doing is giving the dot points. And that sounds more like a Discovery Channel kind of documentary, right? And we all know we flip the channel when we see those after about 2 minutes because they're boring. But we'll sit and listen to a 3-hour movie because it's engaging. We forget we even needed to go to the restroom, right? So what I would highly recommend is making sure that the story isn't longer than it needs to be, but you touch on all the points, and the most important part of that is the emotional element of the journey, right? Without the story of William and the guy with cancer, which is the part that most people just kick out, wasn't even included, then the story really didn't mean anything, right? So what I would suggest is you need to test and validate, and that's the thing I always suggest about sales. It's a science experiment. What I would recommend is try and make your stories longer, see what reaction you get, then shorten them, and you will find the optimum. Don't be afraid to lose a few deals or get a few people to even interrupt you, and don't assume the interruption is that you need to stop telling the story. Maybe they're getting engaged with the story and you can involve them. The one piece of advice I would have is the story, while it is scripted and you are remembering it, remember to use your ability to actively listen to actually connect the story to their unique situation and what they've told you beforehand. You know, a lot of times when I teach people how to do inbound sales, a lot of people are like, oh, tell me a little bit about your business. I hate that because, the number one thing I say is, well, after checking out my website, I'd love to tell you about my business. What questions do you have? And their response is, oh, I actually haven't checked out your website, right? So it's pretty embarrassing for them. What I do is I say, I'm so glad we can get on a call today. Now, I've just had a chance to look at your website. I've looked at the brief notes you've left me. I've checked out your LinkedIn profile, but I'd love to take a step back, hear a little bit more about you, what you're struggling with, and how I can be the most help to you in the time we have together today. As soon as I do that, you feel this relief go over the customer because it doesn't feel like a sales call. They know I've done my research. They don't have to say the same thing to me that they've told everybody else. Now, what I find is they vent, they complain, they tell me their life story, their problem, but nothing that I can't find online, so it actually saves me time because it takes me like 2 minutes to do that research, not 30 minutes on the phone hearing about it. And then what I'll do is I'll ask one question more to help them identify that what they're complaining about or their issue is actually a symptom of a greater problem. And so I'll ask another question to help them lead down to that path, and then I'll start to explain using my a logical framework. What I'm concerned about when you say this, or what I'm worried about for you, if you consider doing that, is actually, you know what? Let me give you an example. Like I'm almost interrupting myself. Because everyone's like, here we go, I'm about to get all this jargon. By interrupting yourself, they feel relieved. And what you'll find is if you do it in that kind of trajectory, what will actually happen is the amount of time they're willing to listen to a story goes up dramatically because they feel like you're helping them with a story rather than pushing a story upon them. And I mean, if you can get 2.5 minutes where you tell them a story, at the end of that, I mean, they see you as the only choice because now, because of the science behind it, they remember more of it, they feel like they've got a better relationship with you, and the moral of the story is it's a no-brainer, right? So it makes it so much easier. Does that answer your question? Perfect. We have one other question.
So I understand the power of using this in sales. It's awesome. My brain went to what your opinion is on using this for like social media posts? Like your presentation started out with, you're not looking for every customer, you're looking for the people that resonate with you. So do you think storytelling is an effective way for people to connect with you that way on social media?
So storytelling, yes, only if you do the other things too, right? And the reason why I say this is one of the things I kind of joke about all the time is that if you can't be the clearest, you have to be the loudest, right? That's why you have to make more phone calls. That's why you have to hustle. That's why, in the networking room, you've got to be the loudest person in the room. It's why on social media, you're taking a photo of your dog or a donut just for something to say, to let people know, hey, we're still here. I hate that, right? For me, I want to be the clearest so I don't have to be the loudest, right? So once you've validated, validation's important, right? Don't just put up a unified message or decide a niche, throw it on your website and go, hope that works, right? Decide what the message is, decide what the niche is, and once you've done that, then you can take a step back and go into a networking room and validate that that's working. Then look at what the 3 major problems your niche has or the 3 major objections they have and create stories for those. And go and validate that your story's landing. Now, if on social media you build that unified message, you build that niche, you've created a sense of relevance. Now, where are the guys at 80/20, by the way? So, by the way, if you enjoyed this presentation, go and say thank you to them, because they're the ones that recommended that I came here. So the thing that I would suggest, though, is when we look at the 80/20 guys, the 2 founders are introverted, right? So they resonated with my message, and they scheduled a phone call with me, and they waited months to talk to me. Why? Because the message landed. Right? If people are just seeing the same messaging, it gets clouded between whether it's you or another provider because they're interested in it getting retargeted by all these ads that all look the same. So if you're vanilla, adding stories will give you a small bump. But if you have a strong message, a strong niche, you understand the 3 major problems, you speak directly to those, then adding stories into your emails, into your social media, into your blog post will give you explosive growth. But if you still are trying to be the loudest because you don't have any of those things, it's the same reason why everybody has, these new tools are going to give you the silver bullet to success. Why don't they give you a silver bullet to success? Because the ones that are finding out about it now, it's likely been giving other people silver bullets for success for a long time. And even the ones that discovered it right at the beginning, it gives them a great boost for a short period until everyone's doing it. Now you've got another full-time job. Right? So what you really want to do is get the strategy right and then leverage tactics to give you explosive growth. Storytelling's a tactic. You've got to get the strategy right first. Does that make sense? Perfect.
I loved what you said about how to handle inbound conversations, kind of the introduction to starting the conversation. How do you address the outbound discussion, and how do you launch into the story? Do you say, let me tell you a story directly, or how do you lead that cold call into that story in that 8 seconds?
Absolutely. So firstly, the most important thing is to come across as a trusted advisor. Okay, so I remember going into cold calls where I sold telecommunications, nowhere near as important or credible as what you're doing. And when I would walk in, I had to go from, here's this guy trying to hard sell me something, to here's my friend, my trusted advisor that's giving me advice like an accountant, right? So the important thing is that you have to have an initial script. Now, how you work out that initial script, I love using the word qualify in there wherever I can to see if you qualify for something. The reason being is especially for those people that are trying to get into high-level individuals to investors through a gatekeeper, it gives you a really great way. I don't know if you qualify, let me put you through to someone. If you're talking to someone directly, talking about how they might be able to qualify for your help actually gets people from going, I'm not interested in this, to, lean forward. I need to at least understand. I used to have people say, I'm not interested in what you're doing, but I want to make sure I qualify anyway, right? People love to qualify for things, even if they're not going to use it. So what I like to do is I like to have a very methodical introduction script that maybe takes 3 to 5 seconds to deliver, ideally with the word qualify. Like my job is to make sure you qualify for that. Now, once I get through that, the goal is really to get the objection, right? So, of course, every now and then you're going to strike it lucky. I mean, people win the lottery, right? But most of the time, you're going to get an objection. Then you want to move into your objection handling cushion. I perfectly understand. Last thing I want to do is waste any of your time. However, and you can do one of 2 things. John was very similar to your situation, said what you did, and then you move in. You don't say, let me tell you a story. You just go straight into it. Now, on the other hand, what you can do is speak for 1 to 1.5 seconds at the most about the logical reason for why their objection doesn't work, or isn't relevant, or is wrong, or to help them see it from a different perspective. Then interrupt yourself and say, actually, let me give you an example, just like I gave as advice to that gentleman. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Firstly, I hope everyone got a bunch of takeaways from this, but just to go back to a couple of those points. So often, the story of Wendy is a great example. I use that on podcasts all the time, and Shane's got a story that he uses on podcasts all the time. People often don't remember the name of the person in the story, but if you don't deliver the name, they don't feel the emotions during hearing the story. So a lot of times when I'm speaking to people on the phone, I'll say, a great example of that would be the story of Wendy. I noticed that you booked this call after hearing me on this podcast. Do you remember the story of Wendy? This was the person that was, and I'll give them a very brief, 3 dot points. Oh yeah, absolutely. But if I said the story of Wendy, they wouldn't. Sometimes when I'm sitting down, and you might have an example where you're sitting down with like the husband, and you're now sitting down with the husband and wife, it seems a little bit weird to tell the same story. So what I like to do is say, when I was talking to John, I shared the story of Wendy and the situation. Actually, John, would it be helpful for me to share that story again, or have you already shared it? And they're like, oh, no, share that story again, because it was meaningful to them. And they tried to tell it, and honestly, they probably butchered it. But to them, it was meaningful, so you get the opportunity to do so. So what you really want to make sure that you're doing is constantly realizing that even though the name of the person in the story isn't relevant to them afterwards, it's relevant at the beginning. Now, is that all the time we have for questions now? Have one more?
And it's kind of coming full circle for me that one of the most impactful moments of this event for me was sitting next to a gentleman yesterday who has been in here for 2 years, but in the vein of running the event, there's people who've been here for 2 years that I've hardly ever really got to talk to or connect with, right? And what you're really talking about in the mask of a story is, in a very short period of time, transforming a relationship in a short period of time. And what happened yesterday is I sat next to a gentleman, and he told a short story about his childhood, right? Growing up, his father was an alcoholic, how it impacted him, which eventually led him to be an alcoholic, which eventually leads to the struggles that he's facing today. And my relationship with that gentleman, inside of 5 quick minutes, was immediately transformed, right? And so I think if you're, considering I want to sit down and actually at our next town hall or our next level 10, get this on the books, that to me is the real life aspect of that's what it can do if you get it dialed in right. And your sales team is equipped with the right stories for the right objections. You can immediately transform a relationship with a seller if you've got it dialed in. Because that's exactly what happened to me yesterday. 2+ years. I know the gentleman, right? We say hi. Hey, hi, man. It's great to see you, right? But we have a relationship now.
Actually, can I give one thing for everybody when you go networking? Because what you just highlighted is that everybody that you've spoken to most of the time doesn't have an impact within seconds of meeting someone. So when we're out networking all the time, we're not having that impact. So when people go out networking, quite frequently what they say is, the elevator pitch that I hate is, I do this for this group of people even if, right? Which feels horrible to say. But then most people here, because they know that, will say, oh, I'm in commercial real estate syndication, or, oh, I flip homes, or I sell homes. All of that sounds uncomfortable. And most people, when they're selling their services or trying to do something, it comes across as, hey, I do this, and I make money out of that, and you look like a person that needs what I do, and I'd love to work with you because I'm trying to buy a new car, and you could really help me with that. That's how most networking is. What I always recommend is, and by the way, this strategy is in the book as well in the later chapters, but it talks about leading with passion and mission. What I heard from you is your passion and mission is really about making sure that every deal that somebody works so hard to attain is actually, secured, even if it's a year down the track, right? And that, to me, sounds like what you're passionate about, and the mission of your organization is to make sure every deal closes, not just the easy ones. Right? For me, when I meet someone at a networking event, firstly, I'm interested before I try to be interesting. So then eventually they're, oh my gosh, Matt, I can't believe I haven't even asked you what it is that you do. And I say, oh, thanks for asking. I'm the rapid growth guy. Full stop, like I just said, and I'm an accountant. Now, because I've given them value, because I was interested, what will then happen is somebody will say, oh, that's interesting. What exactly is that? And my response is all about passion, mission, and not about me. I will say, well, one of the things I love to see more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service provider with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to go and start a business of their own. But what I find more often than not is they get stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, really just feeling like people care about one thing, price. Do you know anyone like that? Now, if I've done my research, I nail that in a networking room because they're all like that. So when they respond in the affirmative, I will then say, well, I'm on a mission to help these people realize they really can have a rapid growth business doing what they love, but it doesn't come from focusing on their functional skill. Instead, they've got to focus on the 3 things outside the scope of their functional skill that really allow them to create a rapid growth business that revolves around them, their family, and their life, not the other way around. And then I might say, actually, let me give you an example. Now, what you'll notice is the difference is I actually didn't say what I do at all, because the story will make that relevant. What I've done is I've hooked them with relevancy, but what I've tried to do is talk about what I love to see, hate to see, and the mission that I'm on. All I've done is shared passion. So for you, as you're going through the book that you all have free access to, what I would highly recommend is think about how you can how you can first yourselves, and then with your team, learn how to articulate your passion and mission for helping people in the industry you're in. Everybody that sells their house to you is selling it to you because they believe that you're helping them. So you can learn how to articulate that. And then once you realize that eventually you'll realize you only want to hire people that actually care about what you care about. That'll make them stay, and it'll put them on a mission to make sure that they help as many people as possible, which also in turn makes you as much money as possible, which means you actually do get to buy the car, as opposed to having lots of lost deals because you come across as pitchy in networking events. So hopefully that helps you. I would highly recommend really thinking about how you network differently, and going back to social media, same thing. I love to see, I hate to see, and the mission that I'm on will be transformative compared to, hey, we do this, we have this functional skill. But I think we're at time.
Matthew, just one quick question. Right here.
Where's that coming from?
Right
Over
here.
there.
Hey, if you were to sit down with someone in here, right? Obviously not today, but if you were to sit down with someone in here and do your best to expedite this process to where they had one solid story for their salespeople, how long would that take?
So, how long did the story transformation up here take? 6 minutes? Maybe 6? Okay, so usually when I will do this, obviously the story I said was different, and as I said, the story you shared was great compared to the ones that I'm usually up here doing. So let's assume that it would normally have taken maybe 10 minutes. Now, it wasn't perfect. Would everyone agree it was good, but it could have been much better. I could have potentially been more articulate. I could have been more concise. So let's say about 20 minutes of really working out what's going to be in it. Okay. Then I've got to write it out. And to write it out, most people will write it out as they say it. You should reflect upon that. Go back tomorrow, but don't spend more time on it, but just let it kind of work on it unconsciously. Come back and sit for about 20 more minutes. And my bet is you'll then have a really great story that you just have to remember. Great. Well, thank you everyone for today. It's been a great audience.